Chapter 5. We Meet Again. But Delmont! Julienne pouted as she stood from the elegant settee and walked to the window overlooking the garden. The sun bathed her in its setting rays. You promised. Julienne, I thought you understood. The business at hand. She nodded her head, silently mocking him as he yet again explained to her why he couldn't attend the small dinner party they were already late for. Yes, Delmont, I do understand. But you know I hate going to these parties without you. They're boring. It is you they wish to see, not me. Business is indispensable. Without my contribution, Julienne only half listened as she played with one of the gold tassels holding the emerald green curtain in place. The sum of the speech would be that he had to attend to business. I will go alone, she said, resigned to the evening, smoothing her skirts. It had taken her almost 3 hours to prepare for him and the evening's events. She had not wanted to dress too darlingly, but also not too prudishly. Her jewellery was not too heavy, but just enough to complement the gown, and her hair was swept back but not piled atop. He had, as always, kissed her hand and recited dutifully, Julienne, you are lovely. There was a knock on the door. It was Stetson, announcing Julienne's parents awaited their departure. Delmont stood, gave his regards, and told Julienne he would call on her in the morning. Delmont had abandoned her once again. The carriage ride to the party seemed long and daunting. Julienne stared out the window at the well-known surroundings. It was beautiful, she admitted, but so wished she could share the sights with Delmont. She was vaguely aware of her parents' conversation about Lord Buxton's involvement with the Bank of England, but the clop of the horse's trot was more fitting to her mood, so she turned her attention there instead. She slumped ever so slightly. She felt overdressed for her mood. Her deep royal blue off-the-shoulders gown had no fancy trim or lace. Delmont disliked frills and fancies, which was most unfortunate, for Julienne rather enjoyed them, and believed they added to the beauty of any gown. A single diamond dangled from her throat, and small diamond and sapphire earrings with a matching bracelet were her only other adamants. She would have liked frills and puffs and bows, but she had sacrificed them for Delmont, and he was not even there to appreciate her efforts. They pulled up in front of a large mansion alight with candles. They were escorted up the stairs and into the large reception hall where Lord and Lady Buxton awaited them. My lord, my lady, the Vendons, the butler announced them. A plump, over-adorned woman greeted them with exaggerated friendliness, then looked around for the missing party. Why? Where is Lord Brent? Lord Brent sends his deepest regrets, Lady Buxton, Julienne began mechanically, but he was called away on urgent business. Oh. She searched the empty doorway just to be sure. I had someone here I wanted him to meet, but no matter. Come meet my guests. The house had the thick scent of flowers and was filled with small, thin objects, small knickknacks, spindly-legged chairs, small portraits with thin frames, small vases with thin flowers. They were led to one of the many sitting rooms. You know the Wishens, Lady Buxton said, delighting in her role as hostess, for it was a new role she had taken on since marrying Lord Buxton. She hadn't come from wealth and was accustomed to hard work. Before married life, she enjoyed taking care of her younger brothers and sisters, tending to housework, shopping for their necessities, and cooking the meals. Not that she didn't enjoy her newfound role as a wealthy lady of society, but still she enjoyed those activities, even though they were now considered beneath her station as the lady of the house. She also happened to love throwing it in the faces of her wealthy relatives, who had refused to lift a finger when she had lost her parents at age 16, leaving them to fend for themselves. Her siblings had also done well for themselves, and visited her often, along with half of England, most of whom were Lord Buxton's business associates. It wasn't the company she minded, for the intimate dinner parties kept her busy 4 to 5 nights out of the week. She simply loved playing hostess. What annoyed her to no end were the gifts she received from her husband's colleagues. Couldn't these people see that she had enough statues of little girls with flowers, and more vases than her cupboards could hold? But Lord Buxton was adamant about keeping each one out on display. Good for public relations, he had told her. Why couldn't they bring something useful, she wondered, like Pierre Vendant and his bottle of fine sherry? Like Pierre Vendant and his bottle of fine sherry. And this is Lord and Lady Gratsworth. Lady Buxton continued the introductions. Julienne smiled politely at the ageing group seated before her, but had the acute sensation of being watched. Looking up over the chairs, her eyes met and locked with coral black eyes rimmed in copper. Her heart stopped, then started beating wildly. Memories flashed through her mind. The tight embrace of his arms, the mischievous glint in his eye, the feeling of his lips on hers. "Julienne, dear?" She quickly looked at her mother, who was gesturing to another couple, the coiners. "How do you do?" She curtsied mechanically, her mind racing. "And this," Lady Buxton said, circling to the man behind the chairs, "is Lord Lansing." Julienne was flummoxed. What was Bruce doing here? Lord Lansing, was that his surname? Too stunned to do or say anything, Julienne watched as Bruce made his way over. Stopping in front of her parents, he kissed Monique's hand, then shook Pierre's. Standing before Julienne, he took her hand with what seemed to be a dreamlike slowness. "How do you do?" he said, bringing her hand to his lips. His face was now lit with unveiled fascination, and his eyes pleaded with her not to reveal their secret. The small gathering acknowledged the attraction with knowing smiles. Soon the chatter of new acquaintances began, and the room came alive. Julienne fidgeted nervously beneath his gaze, but refused to meet his eyes. She looked at Monique, willing her to engage her in conversation. "I hoped we would meet again." Bruce's voice was quiet as he moved behind her. She searched the room to be sure no one else had overheard his comment. Taking her arm, he gently guided her towards a chair in the corner of the room as he spoke. "It is unfortunate that we meet again here. I wished it would have been under different circumstances." Looking up at him, listening to his voice, remembering his kiss, a single word came to mind: extraordinary. Their eyes clung. It was him. He was here. She never thought she would see him again. "Different circumstances?" she echoed a little breathlessly. "Lady Vendant, Jule, I cannot explain, but I must ask something of you." It was there again. She knew she hadn't imagined it. That overwhelming feeling of him, of not one thing in particular, but just of an extraordinary man. Julienne pushed her confusion away as she gazed at him. She decided that he should be a poem, or a musical, not a person, but a feeling. "Trust me," he said. Her eyes lifted to his in question. "Please." "Bruce, He briefly touched her hand. "No questions. Not right now." No one noticed the caress. His fingers were warm. She looked at hers, folded in her lap for a subconscious comparison. Trust him? Austen studied her downturned face, the tip of her nose, the creamy smooth skin, the lustrous hair. He sighed. She could ruin everything for him. He had a role to play. These people knew him as the arrogant, dandified Lord Jeremy Lansing. She knew him as Bruce, his real name. What had possessed him to divulge that information? All she had to do was tell them she had met him before, under a different name, acting as someone else. Suspicions would instantly be raised. He should not have accepted this invitation. It had been too risky. But how could he have known that she would attend? She, of all people. Everything had stopped when she entered the room. His heart had skipped a beat. It would have made sense to him if this reaction was caused by the understanding that she could expose him. Revealing that he went by another name, she could unwittingly make known his deception with his involvement in the Bank of London. He had been working on this operation for months, corresponding regularly with contracts throughout England. It was a one-time, very profitable venture. Tomorrow, he would collect his reward from the Bank of England and Lord Buxton, and they would set sail, preferably without complications. Now, this girl beside him, the one who had consumed his mind at the oddest times throughout the last few days, could be just that complication. He never thought to see her again. The beauty he shared a single kiss with one warm night. And yet, here she was. Julienne caught his eyes falling to her lips, then quickly looked at her hands again, seeing they were shaking slightly. He too must have remembered their kiss. She had 1,000 questions for him. Although thoughts of him had been frequent since their encounter, she never dreamed she would get the opportunity to question him. And yet, from that myriad of questions, this is what came from her lips. Who was that woman at the Cheshire? Appalled at the forward question, Julienne inwardly scolded herself for the intrusive question. He scoffed, then sighed. For some unknown reason, he felt he owed her an answer. How could he explain a lover to such an innocent? "You do not have to tell me," Julienne quickly added. "I honestly don't know why I asked that." Their eyes met again and held for a long moment. "You do not wish to know, then?" "No, I do. Tell me." He smiled and began hesitantly. She was an acquaintance, a lover. Her violet eyes didn't blink as she waited. He didn't continue. "I deduced that much, Bruce. I am not an idiot." He flashed that smile, the one with the dimples, and she had a mental note to make him do that again. "Forgive me. I didn't mean to imply you were." "You were quite harsh with her." "What did she do?" For the life of her, Julienne could not figure out why she was so interested in this woman. And how could she ask such a brazen question of something as intimate as a lover? His head shook slowly. "She had done nothing. The blame is mine." "She must have done something to upset you." "Nothing. We were lovers for a long time. She wanted more of me, and I could not offer her more." "Oh, Julienne, stop it," she warned herself silently. But the next words escaped before she could stop them. Could not or would not. If her mother ever heard the conversation she was having with this man, she would undoubtedly be mortified. He brushed the backs of his fingers beneath his ear. "I just don't wish to." "You mean marriage?" "Yes." "To her or to anyone?" "Either. Both. The result is the same." The twang in her stomach told her this wasn't the answer she wanted to hear. "I see. Do you love her?" He quietly answered, "No." She looked at him, and with an accusing finger held aloft, told him, "Then you should not have been lovers." She smoothed her skirts, mumbling, "The Lord would not approve." His brows knit. They were silent for a moment. "Let's change the subject," he said uncomfortably, shifting from side to side. "Tell me of your family." She smiled, looking over at her mother, entertaining a small group with some story or other. "My family is wonderful. Mama is beautifully alive and everybody loves her. And Papa, he is kind and loving and the best father there ever was." "Do you have brothers and sisters?" "No. I had a brother, but he passed away before I was born. I do have a grandpapa." At his raised brow, she clarified, "He is like an older brother, a much older brother." They both laughed. "He is a lot of fun. You would like him." "If he is at all like you, I think I would enjoy him very much." "Yes. I think we are quite a bit alike." She vacillated between this being a favourable trait or not. "And you? Do you have siblings?" Glancing up now, he saw a servant entering the room. Dinner would be announced shortly. He had to say something. "Jule." "Yes?" "If you never believe another word I say, believe me now." Dinner was announced, and everyone stood, the woman waiting to be escorted into the dining room. "Believe you? About what?" "Oh, Jeremy," Lady Buxton called, and to Julienne's amazement, Bruce answered. "You may take Lord Brent's chair if you wish. I'm sure Lady Vendant will not object." He turned quickly to Julienne. "Brent?" he asked. "As in Sterling Brent. Could there be a relation?" "Jeremy?" Julienne asked. "Why is she calling you Jeremy?" The others were filing out the door and beyond hearing range. "Jewel, I cannot explain, but please trust me." "Come on, you two," Lady Buxton called, trying to hurry them along. "And remember, Jeremy, Julienne is already spoken for." She shared a smile with Monique before exiting the room. "You're married? To a Brent? Why is she calling you Jeremy?" Come, you two," came Lady Buxton's retreating voice. Julienne watched the man, with whom she had shared a clandestine kiss, take the seat across the table from her. He now apparently answered to the name of Jeremy Lansing, not Bruce. Their eyes clung with unanswered questions floating between them. "I do wish Lord Brent was here," Lady Buxton began. "He would be so interested in your construction business. Or is it an architectural business you own, Jeremy?" Julienne saw his fleeting sigh as if to say, "Here we go," before he answered. "Both," he said with a jaunting ping to his voice, taking on an arrogant air. Julienne watched in amazement as he threw her a quick glance to gauge her reaction. "Do you work here in London?" Pierre asked. "I do have offices here, yes, but most of my actual work is overseas, the Caribbean, West Indies. You know the sort." He emphasised this with a wave of his hand. "Do you own a large company?" someone inquired. But it was Lord Buxton who answered, giving Bruce the chance to catch Julienne's eye. She was at a loss as to what was happening, but had to admit it was all very amusing. She gently flipped her fingers, mocking his gesture, and he smiled. "I say, indeed he does. One of the largest," Lord Buxton was saying. "Is that so?" Julienne asked him sceptically. He stared her straight in the eye and replied, "Jolly big company." She picked up her wineglass, her eyes still locked with his. "Indeed," she murmured. He was the only one who caught her sarcasm. "I was just thinking," Lady Buxton said, "that with Delmont's business, he's in shipping, you know, his family are very wealthy merchants. Well, his father has mentioned wanting to build another office in some place or another, and with you, Jeremy, being in the construction business, I thought you might be interested in working together." "Oh, it is too bad," Bruce said, "but I am afraid I have as many contracts as I can handle at the moment." "I say," Lord Buxton exclaimed, "with the amount of notes you receive from the bank and the names from which they came, I don't quite see how you manage. I pity you for your contract with the Duke of Barringworth. He is quite the curmudgeon." "Oh, do you know him?" Bruce asked. Julienne detected something in his voice that piqued her curiosity. "I've dined with him once or twice." That was quite sufficient. Lady Buxton fidgeted, impatient with the conversation not concerning her. "What notes, dear?" she asked, and Lord Buxton turned to her. "Money notes. I'll explain them to you later. So when does Barringworth's project begin?" "He's not sure, actually. Land issues, you know." Bruce shook his head, and Julienne thought she heard, "Yes, I know them well." Lady Buxton waved her bejewelled hand in the air. "So, Jeremy, what are you developing now?" "Well, some of my chaps are in the islands doing a bit of something for Prince Tabuli." "A prince!" exclaimed Lady Buxton, knocking over her water glass in her excitement. Immediately, a servant was there to clean it as Lady Buxton gave her an impatient look, as if the servant had made the unfortunate mess. "Tell us more," she said attentively. He looked at Julienne and began retelling his story. "Well, it's a ducky little place. Sort of small palace, really. Quite out of the ordinary. The first of its kind I've ever designed." "How wonderful," Lady Gratsworth said softly. Julienne smiled, wishing to talk more with the grey-haired woman. Age brought about knowledge the young didn't possess yet, and Julienne was always eager to learn from the elderly. "It's set way up on a hill," he continued softly, and the old woman's eyes sparkled as if lost in some secret memory. "From the ground floor windows, you can look down into the town where everyone gathers during the day. There are seashell roads and glorious exotic plants down the side of the hill." "Seashell roads," she repeated, awed. "Yes, mostly pink shells, and from the top floor windows you can see out over the ocean. The light blue-green waters roll in to meet the shore below the hill. It is a sight to behold." "Sounds so wonderful." "It is, Lady Gratsworth. It really is." There was a short, contented silence before the quiet Lady Fox spoke up for the first time. "Tell us of another." "Another?" He thought for a moment. "Well, let me think. I know. I'll tell you of a strange happening in France as I was restoring one of the oldest cathedrals." His voice was so low, so mystical, his eyes so dark yet clear. Julienne was as mesmerized as the other guests. "The first time I was there, I went alone to see how much work and such would be needed. It was late, and the cathedral was empty. Not a soul to be seen. But they were there to be heard." He looked down the table at each face. "They were playing music for me. Soft, angel wing music. I searched around, but I knew I would find nothing, for I had this strange feeling come over me. Very warm, very content. I stood in the center of the room alone, listening. It was so still save the magical music. Then someone came through the door, and the music faded away. It was a woman who came to pray for her sick father. I waited in the doorway before leaving, listening for the music, but it didn't come again. I pray to this day that it played for that woman too." The room was engulfed in complete silence. For a moment, he stared at nothing, then broke into a small smile. "Well, that happened a long time ago," he said in a livelier voice. "Now, I'm working on quite a formidable project." He waited to see if anyone wished to hear about it. "For whom?" Lady Buxton asked eagerly. "Someone important, I'm sure." "Have you heard of Baron von Zumberg?" She hadn't, but would not disclose her ignorance. "Oh, him! How exciting!" "I think so," he said, gently stirring the room back into life. "I haven't actually finished the design, but it will be ready soon." "Oh, that's grand," Lady Gratsworth sighed. "He is a bit private, so we mustn't talk of it to others." He was pointing at each woman, as if tapping them on the nose. Julienne hid a smile. "Oh yes, we quite understand," Lady Buxton replied, and the others swiftly agreed. Julienne scanned the table and realized that these people shared her affliction of eagerly being ensnared by this man. Bruce, or was it Jeremy, flashed Julienne a boyish grin, and she just had to return it with a soft smile of her own. He was a complex man, and one she would never have the opportunity to decipher. "You say Lord Brent was called away on business?" Lord Buxton asked, more to himself than to anyone in particular. Julienne nodded apologetically, but he didn't notice as he went on. "I hope Austin hasn't taken hold of one of his ships." "Has he been spotted in England?" someone asked. "Not in England per se, but in English waters. About a week ago, he took a merchant ship coming in from Spain, I think I heard. They never even knew he was coming. Quite a cutthroat, I've heard. Black-hearted." "Captain Austen," Julienne frowned. Until a month ago, that name had been the centre of many a daydream for her. Her parents had related stories of the pirate as they sat before the fire, though in truth, she revered him as more of a hero than a villain. She had grown up with his name, and had admired him until that day not long ago. She and Sylvina were exiting a boutique where they had just chosen the lace for their costume for the ball when she heard a gravelly voice behind her say, "Don't let Austin hear you say that." She turned to catch a quick peek at the man, who perhaps personally knew the notorious pirate Austin. "Is he back then?" another man asked nervously. "You never know, but he is everything just the same. His men are everywhere." Julienne glanced excitedly at Sylvina. "I warn you, my friend," the man behind her continued. "If he hears you, he'll slit your throat and pull out your spine." Her blood had turned cold. That one sentence had changed her hero to the devil himself. It was common for her parents to gloss over his more violent actions in favour of his heroics in the stories they told her. She knew she had chosen not to dwell on the violence, but could she have been so naive as to dismiss his true nature? "He will slit your throat and pull out your spine," put it all in perspective for her. Heroic swashbuckling inspired daydreams, but ruthless violence produced nightmares. At that time, she had put away her infatuation with Pirate Austin to be scrutinised later. Julienne shuddered as she looked down the table at Lord Buxton with concern. He may be back in England. "I've seen Captain Austin," said Lord Coiner. No one noticed Bruce's knuckles whiten around his goblet. Lady Coiner looked at her husband and recited the 4 most used words in her vocabulary since marrying him. "I never knew that." He nodded and leaned back in his chair, basking in the full, undivided attention of the room. "It was in the Netherlands when I was waiting for my trunks to be unloaded from my ship. The Black Fortune was docked right next to us." Julienne heard the soft chuckle from across the table and watched Lord Lansing shake his head, obviously not believing a word that came from this braggart's mouth. But Julienne's interest was captured, so she turned her attention back to the storyteller. There he stood on deck, talking to another man when a young boy, 15 or so, probably his cabin boy, came up, quite frantic about something. Austin just waved him away and kept talking. Well, the boy began to pace. He apparently had something rather important to say, but Austin just ignored him and kept talking. Then the boy tried to get Austin's attention, and without even looking at him, Austin took out his pistol and shot him in the head. The table gasped in horror. "How awful!" Julienne said, horrified, to the man across from her, who glared at the storyteller with ferocity in his eyes. She watched as he struggled to get his anger under control. Even if she watched him for a century, she would never have guessed what he would say next. "Poppycock," he blurted out, and raised a quick brow to Julienne before all eyes were centered on him. "Really?" he berated, trying to stay in character. "Is this any type of conversation for the dinner table?" "And in front of ladies," Julienne added for good measure. The room once again quieted. "Oh dear, back in England," Lady Gratsworth muttered, pulling her shawl close around her neck. Bruce turned to her. No, I'm sure England is safe from him. I've heard he tries to avoid us for some reason or another." "Yes, but," she said, reluctant to go on. "What is it?" Lady Buxton asked. "Well, it happened over 10 years ago now, and it was nothing really, but I'll never forgive him. I had purchased a chair in India. Nothing of extreme value, and it would never have matched any of my other furnishings, yet I fell in love with it." She stared off into the distance. "It was the darkest green velvet, and the wood was inlaid with small gems at the top." She smiled sadly. "Out of all the ships on the sea, Captain Austin chose to burn the one my chair was being shipped on. I guess I was never meant to have it, because I never found anything like it. I still curse him every once in a while for it." Bruce smiled. "I find it hard to imagine you cursing anyone, Lady Gratsworth." "Oh, but I do. Not too often, but I do." "Well, I really don't suppose pirates have anything to do with Lord Brent," Lady Buxton offered. "Quite," her husband agreed. "If he is close to England, I have no doubt he will be arrested forthwith. He has quite a price on his head." The servants came in and began to clear the table, and Julienne once again found herself admiring the man across the table's profile. With her eyes, she traced the curve of a shiny lock of hair that curled gently, caressing his throat. He reached up and brushed it away, somehow making her feel insulted. Glancing down the table, she smiled. No one knew she had ever met this man before. No one knew they had shared a kiss. She had a secret. Lord Buxton stood, scattering her thoughts, and suggested the men retreat to the study for cigars, pipes, and brandy, while the women went to the sitting room for tea. She felt her lightness grow heavy, as she realised it would be some time before seeing him again. She never understood this separation ritual. If you attend a gathering, you should all gather, not be divided. Taking a last glance across the table, she saw that boyish grin appear to lift her spirits back where they should be. The sitting room had no dominant colour, but was cluttered with many things. Everything was either small or thin, or both, just like in the other rooms. Julienne liked clutter, but gaudy clutter, something large enough to put her mind to work. When she was small, she often liked to stare at intricate frameworks or exotic vases and find different shapes in the designs. Even when she was being scolded, she would occupy her mind by finding faces or shapes of animals in the grain of the wood furniture, and sometimes had to refrain from laughing or showing her new discovery to her parents. She took a seat next to her mother, accepting her tea and adding her usual 2 sugars. "Julienne," Lady Buxton said, with a wave of her hand, accidentally throwing a lemon slice across the room. She frowned at it, and a servant hurried to fetch it, and she continued, "I've heard of the new painting you've acquired. A René, isn't it?" "Yes. Papa got it for me as a wedding present. It has just come over from France. It is absolutely beautiful." "You must be very excited about your upcoming nuptials." "Yes, I am." "I only have one René, but I must admit, my favourite is my Chardon. I purchased it 4 years ago," she told the small group, delighted to have everyone's attention once again. "I found it in a small town." Her story faded away as Julienne wondered where she kept her fine art. She didn't care for Chardon as much as she did René. She admired his talent, but his paintings weren't dreamy enough for her. Her head tilted as she surveyed the room. How the servants kept the dust from all those little knickknacks, she would never know. Would Lady Buxton actually notice if half of them were accidentally broken? Perhaps the servants could gradually give them away as Christmas presents. "Oh yes, he must be quite wealthy," she heard Lady Buxton say as she turned back into the conversation. "He has to be, with all the money he has been receiving from my husband." "And extremely handsome," Lady Coyner added. "Don't you agree, Julienne?" "Handsome? Who?" "Lord Lansing, dear." "Oh, yes, he is." "Thank you," he said from the door, startling the women whose faces all pinkened simultaneously. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to make my apologies, for I must be departing." "So soon?" Lady Buxton asked, standing, the saucer resting in her lap, tumbling to the floor. "I'm sorry," he said with a smile, "but I have a meeting I must attend tonight." Julienne's stomach dropped. She had been looking forward to talking with him again. Perhaps he would tell her what all this Jeremy Lansing business was about. But no, he had to leave because of business. Why were business meetings constantly interrupting her social plans? How would men like it if women went rushing off because of a sketching emergency? Then a thought struck her. He never said business. Maybe it was a lover's tryst. Of course. Who had business scheduled at this hour of the night? How absurd. Perhaps he was meeting with the woman from the Cheshire. Or another woman from the theatre. Or from church. Maybe he had a different woman for each name he went by. Well, Lord Lansing, goodbye and good riddance. "Julienne," her mother said with a faint disbelieving smile. "Yes?" Her face flared red, and she wondered if she had spoken the words out loud. Reluctantly turning to the man in the doorway sporting an insulted raised brow, she concluded she had. After a moment of panic, and to her absolute horror, she burst into laughter. The women gasped. Lady Buxton fairly shrieked. But to Julienne's relief and delight, Bruce followed her lead and joined her in laughter, somehow finding the situation amusing. The rest of the room was left wondering What could possibly be so entertaining about this scenario?